Hey, what's up, friends? Aaron from Unison here today. Today I want to dive into a video going over common mixing mistakes, and this can apply anywhere from beginner all the way to even advanced. But this is mainly just kind of focusing on what a lot of beginners do when they're first starting out making music and they're feeling kind of, lost with mixing. They're not sure what exactly to do when it comes to mixing. And so I just wanted to kind of go over some common mixing mistakes that I've seen producers do, as well as what I did when I first started making music, and kind of replace these bad habits with, better information and with some guidance as well to help with your mixes and hopefully get your tracks sounding much better. So we're going to be going over 5 tips today as usual. So let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so the first tip we're going to be going over today is adding too many plugins or just adding unnecessary effects that you think might help your mix, but actually it's not doing anything, or it's just making the sound or your mix worse. And so by going and adding too many plugins or just unnecessary plugins to a sound, it's just not going to help. If we look here at the project that I'm in, as you can see, I have very little going on. Pretty much typically on everything, I usually try and have EQ and compression, and that's about it. You want to use the compression to kind of get your levels even, and then use EQ to kind of go and shape and sculpt the sound, clean out any unnecessary frequencies that might be muddying up the mix. And that's really about it. If you're doing like some sound design and things like that, and those plugins are like affecting the sound source itself, obviously you want to keep those on because they're changing the sound. But if you're just adding them for the sake of like mixing purposes or whatever, or say you watch some other tutorial video and you see this particular instructor is like adding all this stuff, typically they have a reason for that. So, if it doesn't apply to your session, then there's no need to add it. So what I would do as a new producer is I would just go and throw stuff on and see how it affects the sound and see if it actually does anything. And, if it helps, that's good. If it doesn't, turn it off. You don't need too many plugins at the end of the day if it's not going to do anything. It's more so just kind of getting familiar with the tools and knowing exactly what they do. And so if, not every channel needs a ton of plugins, and that's okay. I always say less is more. Tip number 2, order is everything. And what I mean by that is basically the order in which you go and place plugins on a channel strip can drastically go and change things. So typically what I do, if you look here, I have just a very simple kind of effect chain happening. I have a time-based effect, this delay here. I have a compressor, and then I have an EQ. And so what I'm talking about is, I can either go and EQ my compression, or I can compress my EQ, or, I can go and EQ and compress my delay, or I can just EQ and compress the sound and have the delay after, but the delay isn't EQ or compressed at all. It's coming after that. And so by choosing the order of how these plugins come into play on the sound, it can kind of vary the sound. And, by thinking about, do I want to do this particular order, that particular order, it can kind of help, basically help you choose how you want to go and mix things and what order you want to do things, depending on like the effect you want to get. So typically I have it as time-based effects, processing, things like that. Usually that comes first. If I'm doing some pretty hefty sound processing, I may throw in an EQ somewhere in the middle just to kind of clean things up so it's not getting too dirty. And then, usually at the very end, I'll have a compressor with like sidechain if I'm doing more like dance floor music, and then like an EQ. But, say I'm doing something like this, where this is just a hip hop beat, I'll play a little snippet. Typically I don't hear too much sidechain on hip hop, so I just leave this as is. And then I just have the EQ And that's pretty much it. And then maybe, you know, if I were to be using like reverb or other things like that, it doesn't need it in this particular instance. But if I were to be dropping something like that, I probably drop it before the compressor, because usually compressing your reverb, you can get that bigger reverb sound, or you could drop it after. Hopefully that makes sense, but basically order is everything when it comes to arranging your channel strips here. By the way, if you like the sounds that are being used in today's demo, you can grab them from the Unison Beatmaker Blueprint free pack. There'll be a link in the description below where you can pick up this pack for free, no charge to you, and try it out yourself. All right, let's jump into the next tip. Tip number 3, turn things down rather than turning them up in your mix, especially when you're trying to keep a certain amount of headroom if you're going to be sending it off to someone to get mastered, or if you're going to master it yourself. It's better to turn things down and have more headroom rather than trying to turn everything up, trying to get that certain element in your mix to kind of pop through. It's just going to cause a lot of fighting and a lot of just like chaos in the mix, and just a lot of frequencies overlapping each other. It's better to go and use things like EQ or compression, or even using panning, different ways to kind of bring the volume out of a certain element rather than just keep turning the fader up higher and higher and higher. So let me demonstrate. So here, I have these 3 different guitar layers. And so there's this lower kind of like accent one here. And then this higher one. And then this main one here. And so because these 2 here are basically doing the same thing, it might be beneficial to go and maybe perhaps pan them a little bit left and right. Luckily, they are doing 2 totally different things. One is an octave higher than the other, so they're kind of covering completely different frequency ranges. So that already right there helps the mix greatly, rather than, if they were doing the exact same thing and were in the same frequency range, then they would be fighting with each other, and we'd have to kind of figure out how to mix them each separately so that they're not phasing each other. So, here we have this one. I went ahead and panned this a little bit to the left, and then this higher one to the right, just a tad. And so as you can see, this lower one, I have brought up in volume, but what I can do instead is just turn this down and go ahead and take an EQ and just drop that there on this channel. And then I can go ahead and let's just see how it's looking. So already I want to take all these lows out. I don't need these low frequencies. And so I'm seeing where most of the frequency range is on this layer, and that is just right here in kind of like the mid range and some of like the mid highs. But what I mainly want to bring out are some of these higher ones, so that way it kind of pops through the mix more, because this one already is really high, so it's kind of doing its job. But since it's panned to the right, we want something that's kind of poking out in the left ear just a little bit, not too much. It doesn't need to be as bright as this one, because this is still kind of the taking over that main frequency range in the mix overall. So now if I go ahead and pop this, versus without, sounds a little dull, but when I do this, it sounds more uniform, and there's at least like that pop happening in that frequency range on both sides, and it just feels much more full in that frequency range. And so then, I could potentially do the same here with this lower layer. I mean, it's completely covering a different range of frequencies because it does sound like it's lower. As you can see, I've already kind of wrote them off, but just to show you, there's a good amount of low end information there. So if I roll this off again, just because I don't need that, and if I pop around this somewhere similar, I don't need it to be exactly the same. Since this is a lower, since these are lower notes, I could probably just kind of brighten up something a bit lower in this, where are we at? Around the 1000 kilohertz. And that sounds good. Let me try panning it to the right a little bit. I kind of like it right there in terms of panning. It kind of shines a bit more. And so, yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that sounds great. And, the levels are still pretty low. I could probably bring this down more, but I mean, this is already the lowest layer. And, even though it's the lowest in volume and it also is the lowest in terms of frequency range, it still shines through great just because I did this little EQ boost right here on this layer. And that was all that it really needed to kind of shine through. And now everything sits really well all together in the mix. Tip number 4, when you're done working on your song and you're going into that final mix, go and mix in one element at a time versus trying to mix everything all at once. And so what I mean by that is, here, if you just hit the tab key, it'll go and show you this view here, and so I can see all the different volumes here for everything. And if I go ahead and just hit Control A, or sorry, if I click here, Control A, it'll highlight everything, and I can bring the volumes down of everything to 0, and then I can go ahead. Let me go ahead and turn off my master. And now I can go ahead and start bringing in each element of the song. So let me start where this is where the drums and all that are happening. So now I can bring in my kick. Oh, gotta bring the group up. Actually, let me do this to all the groups. I just double click, it'll bring the groups back to 0. There we go. So now I have the kick here, and I want to look at this meter right here and make sure that it's sitting around like between -6 and -4, and then I can go ahead and start bringing in the 808. And then actually I'll bring in the clap and the snare. And again, since both of these are playing, I just pan them a little bit to the left and to the right. That way they're not both just directly in the middle. And I can just keep continuing like that. Bring in this hi-hat. And then this other snare here. Maybe I pan this to the right. And then I can just keep going like that, and then bring in these other elements and just continue on and on until everything is mixed in, and then I can just sit and listen on headphones, in my car, on my monitors, whatever devices that you might have that you can listen on, and just listen to things and kind of adjust taste based on these different listening devices. Tip number 5, check your mix in mono as well as stereo, especially if you're going to be playing your music out on like systems like at a club or a venue, things like that. It's always good to check and make sure that certain elements are in mono, so that way they translate well. A lot of live speakers and systems, things like that, usually only play in mono, so it's good just to make sure most of your elements can at least translate well with that. And so let me go ahead and demonstrate. What I usually do is I'll check and make sure that at least my 808 is in mono. And so what I can do is just look up something like utility here, and I can just go ahead and put it in mono. That way I know for sure that the bass is in mono. But what you could do is use something like Isotope's Insight, and that has this kind of like stereo field here, so you can check and see, make sure that things are in mono for sure. So if I were to turn this off, let's just check and see. So we know for sure this is mono. This is coming straight in the middle, whereas like, say like a pad or something. Let's just go ahead and play this here. As you can see, huge, very wide sound going on. Lots of depth. And so, that's fine. It's okay because it's at least showing up in this middle area as well. It's not just on the sides. So it will still translate well over to like these other systems and things like that. And it'll translate on most listening devices and be fine. And same with like, the drums and stuff. Like even though I did pan them just slightly here and there, they're still going to go and translate well, just because, they're not like being panned super hard right, super hard left. It does make for a good mix by doing that sometimes, but I think in this particular case, it should be fine. And so same thing here, we can just kind of check all these different elements here and just check and see, how they sound in mono versus stereo. And, sometimes stereo can be good too, because it just makes the sound feel much more wider and it just sounds very crisp and, all that jazz. But definitely good to check your mix in mono. So let me go ahead and actually just drop a utility on my master here. And let's just put it in mono and see how everything kind of translates. So far I hear everything in mono. I hear the guitars. Maybe bring some of these up. There we go. I mean, yeah, I can hear the hat, the kick, the bass, all the drums. I can hear the guitars. Now let's check these. Again, I hear everything totally fine. So I think that tells me that it's going to translate well on most systems and it will still sound great. All right, everyone, those were the 5 tips that I had for today. Hopefully some of these will help give you some guidance and help you to kind of know what to do with your mix when you're approaching your next track, session, etc., whatever you might be doing. If you have any other tips as well that help, please drop a comment below. If you're liking these vids, please consider subscribing to the channel and leave a like on this vid. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time.